The bitter wind of Kithra cut through Marcus Vale's thermal suit like ice-cold knives, each gust carrying crystalline snow that stung his exposed face. He pulled his hood tighter and pressed forward through the knee-deep drifts, his emergency pack weighing heavily on his shoulders. 3 days had passed since his cargo hauler, the Wandering Star, had been forced into an emergency landing on this frozen moon, its navigation systems fried by an unexpected solar flare. The crash had left him stranded on a world that seemed determined to kill anything foolish enough to set foot on its surface. Temperatures dropped to nearly 60 degrees below standard during the long nights, and even during the brief periods when Kithra's distant sun provided some warmth, the mercury rarely climbed above freezing. His ship's distress beacon was damaged, its signal weak and intermittent. Until rescue came, if it ever came, survival was his only priority. Marcus adjusted his grip on the plasma cutter he'd salvaged from the ship's toolkit. His reconnaissance mission to the nearby ridge had been successful. He discovered what appeared to be the remains of a research outpost, half buried in snow and ice. If he was lucky, there might be supplies, maybe even a working communication array. The trek had taken longer than expected, though, and the pale sun was already beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of amber and gold that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. He paused to catch his breath, vapor forming small clouds that froze almost instantly in the frigid air. That's when he saw her. At first, Marcus thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The cold did that sometimes, created mirages and false shapes in the swirling snow. But as he blinked and focused, the figure became unmistakably real. A woman, though not quite human, stood near the ruins of what might have once been a storage shed, her slender form barely visible against the white expanse. Her skin was a pale blue, like morning sky seen through ice, and her long hair appeared almost silver in the fading light. She wore what looked like the tattered remains of a research suit, though most of the insulation seemed to have been torn away or worn through. Most striking of all, she clutched something against her chest, a small bundle that moved with the unmistakable rhythm of breathing. Marcus felt his heart skip as realization hit him. The bundle was a baby. Both mother and child were clearly suffering from exposure and malnutrition. The woman's cheeks were hollow, her movements slow and unsteady. Even from a distance, he could see that she was struggling to remain upright. The infant's cries were weak, barely audible over the wind. Every rational part of Marcus's mind screamed at him to turn away. His supplies were limited, enough food for maybe another week, too if he rationed carefully. Water wasn't a problem with all the snow around, but everything else was precious. The logical choice, the survival choice, would be to pretend he hadn't seen them and continue on his way. But as he watched the woman try desperately to shield her child from the cutting wind, logic seemed like a poor substitute for humanity. "Hey," he called out, raising one hand to show he meant no harm while keeping the other visible and away from his tools. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The woman's head snapped up, her large eyes, a startling shade of violet, wide with fear and something that might have been hope. She took a step backward but didn't flee, her gaze darting between his face and the pack on his shoulders. Marcus could see raw hunger in her expression, and it hit him like a physical blow. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his pack and rummaged through its contents. His fingers found one of the protein bars he'd been hoarding, along with a small container of synthesized fruit paste, emergency rations that were bland but nutritious. He held them out toward her, making sure his movements were slow and non-threatening. "Food," he said simply. "For you and the little one." The woman stared at the offered supplies, then back at his face. Tears began to well in her violet eyes, and when she reached out to take the food, her hand trembled violently. The moment her fingers closed around the protein bar, she broke down completely, sinking to her knees in the snow while crystal tears froze on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse but speaking perfect standard. "Thank you, thank you." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He knelt down beside her, pulling more supplies from his pack. "I've got more," he said, his voice gentler than he'd expected. "And shelter, too." My ship's about 2 kilometers from here. It's not much, but it's warm and safe. The woman looked up at him through her tears, clutching her child closer. Why? She asked, her voice barely audible. Why would you help us? You don't even know us. Marcus gave her a small smile, running a gloved hand through his dark hair. The question caught him off guard, but the answer came easily. Because it's the right thing to do, he said. And because nobody should have to face a place like this alone. He paused, then extended his hand to help her up. I'm Marcus Vale. Nessa, she replied softly, accepting his assistance. Her skin was surprisingly warm despite the cold, and her grip was stronger than he'd expected. And this is Zara. The baby, Zara, made a small sound and reached out with tiny fingers toward the protein bar her mother held. Her skin had the same pale blue hue as her mother's, and her eyes, when they opened, were the same striking violet. Well, Nessa and Zara, Marcus said, glancing at the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear, what do you say we get out of this cold? As they began the trek back toward his ship, Marcus couldn't help but notice how the woman, Nessa, seemed to know exactly which paths to take through the treacherous terrain. She moved with the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time on this frozen world, avoiding hidden crevasses and unstable snow drifts that might have slowed their progress. You've been here a while, he observed, offering his arm for support when she stumbled slightly. Longer than I care to remember, she replied, adjusting Zara against her chest. The baby had grown quiet, perhaps sensing the warmth and safety that Marcus's presence provided. I was part of a research expedition studying the unique mineral formations beneath the ice. When our supply ship failed to return. She trailed off, but Marcus understood. Stranded, abandoned, left to survive on a world that seemed actively hostile to life. He'd been alone on Kythera for only 3 days and already felt the psychological weight of isolation. He couldn't imagine enduring it for weeks or months. Well, he said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, you're not alone anymore. The wandering star came into view as they crested a small ridge, its hull scarred and blackened from the crash landing but still largely intact. Emergency lights glowed softly from the main cabin windows, and Marcus felt a surge of relief at the sight of home, such as it was. It's not much to look at, he said, helping Nessa navigate the final stretch of rough terrain, but the life support systems are still functional, and there's enough power to keep us warm. As they approached the ship's airlock, Marcus noticed that Nessa was staring at the vessel with something approaching wonder. Her scientific mind was probably cataloging the modifications he'd made over the years, the jury-rigged repairs and personal touches that marked the ship as his own. She's beautiful, Nessa said softly. I haven't seen a Mark 7 cargo hauler in years. You've taken good care of her. Marcus felt an unexpected flush of pride. The wandering star has been my home for the better part of a decade. She's gotten me out of more scrapes than I can count. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, and warm air rushed out to greet them. Marcus ushered Nessa and Zara inside, sealing the door behind them as the system began its decontamination cycle. Within moments, they were stepping into the ship's main cabin, where the temperature was a blessed 20 degrees above standard. Nessa sank into one of the passenger seats with a sigh of relief, cradling Zara close. The baby had begun to fuss slightly, probably hungry and certainly overwhelmed by the sudden change in environment. Make yourselves comfortable, Marcus said, moving toward the small galley area. I'll get some proper food prepared. Nothing fancy, but it'll be warm and filling. As he worked, heating ration packs and preparing bottles of nutrient solution, Marcus found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guests. Nessa had managed to unwrap some of the tattered fabric around her shoulders, revealing more of her unusual but undeniably attractive features. Her blue skin had a subtle luminescence to it, and her silver hair caught the cabin lights in fascinating ways. More than her physical appearance, though, it was her presence that drew his attention. Despite everything she'd clearly endured, there was a strength about her, a resilience that spoke to her inner character. She spoke softly to baby Zara, her voice musical and soothing, and the child responded by settling into a more peaceful state. "Here," Marcus said, offering her a steaming cup of broth and a plate of reconstituted vegetables. "It's not gourmet, but it should help." Nessa accepted the food gratefully, and Marcus watched as she took her first careful sip. Her eyes closed in apparent bliss, and she made a small sound of appreciation that sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "This is wonderful," she said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I'd almost forgotten what real food tasted like." As she ate, Marcus prepared a bottle for Zara, testing the temperature carefully before offering it to Nessa. The baby latched onto it immediately, her tiny hands grasping the container with desperate hunger. "How long?" Marcus asked gently, settling into the seat across from them. "How long have you been out there?" Nessa was quiet for a long moment, her attention focused on feeding Zara. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with old pain. "4 months," she said. "Maybe 5. Time becomes fluid when you're just trying to survive each day." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for this remarkable woman. To survive alone on Kythera for that long, with a baby no less, required strength and resourcefulness beyond anything he could imagine. "The research station," he said. "Is that where you've been staying?" She shook her head. "Too exposed. I found some caves about a day's walk from here, heated by geothermal vents. They were warmer, safer." She paused, looking down at Zara, who had finished her bottle and was beginning to drowse. "But the food ran out weeks ago. I'd been making longer and longer forays, looking for anything edible. Today I wasn't sure we'd make it back to the caves." The quiet admission hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of what might have been. Marcus reached across the small space and gently touched her hand. "You're safe now," he said simply. "Both of you." As the ship's artificial night cycle began and the cabin lights dimmed automatically, Marcus helped Nessa arrange a comfortable sleeping area using spare blankets and cushions. Zara had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, her tiny face peaceful for the first time since Marcus had found them. "Marcus," Nessa said softly as he prepared to retreat to his own small quarters. "I don't know how to thank you. What you did today, sharing your food when you barely have enough for yourself, it goes against every survival instinct." Marcus paused in the doorway, turning back to look at her. In the dim light, with her silver hair spread across the makeshift pillow and her violet eyes reflecting the soft glow of the emergency lighting, she looked almost ethereal. "Maybe," he said with a slight smile, "survival isn't just about staying alive. Maybe it's about staying human, too." As he settled into his own bunk that night, listening to the soft sounds of breathing from the main cabin, Marcus found himself thinking about the unexpected turn his situation had taken. Just this morning, he'd been alone on a hostile world, focused solely on his own survival. Now, he was responsible for 2 other lives, and strangely, the burden didn't feel heavy. Instead, it felt like purpose. Outside the ship's hull, the winds of Kythera continued to howl across the frozen landscape, but inside the wandering star, 3 souls had found warmth, safety, and perhaps something even more precious, hope. Marcus woke to the soft sound of humming drifting from the main cabin. For a moment, he lay still in his narrow bunk, disoriented by the unfamiliar melody. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, the discovery of Nessa and baby Zara in the frozen wasteland, their desperate condition, the decision that had changed everything. He dressed quickly in clean thermal wear and padded barefoot into the main cabin, where he found Nessa sitting cross-legged on the makeshift bed he'd arranged for her. She was gently bouncing Zara on her knee while humming what sounded like a lullaby, her silver hair catching the morning light that filtered through the ship's small viewports. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle them. Nessa looked up with a smile that transformed her entire face. The hollow, desperate look from yesterday had been replaced by something warmer, more alive. A full night's sleep and proper nutrition had worked wonders, though Marcus could see she was still painfully thin. "Good morning, Marcus," she replied, her musical voice carrying a note of genuine happiness. "I hope we didn't wake you." Zara was getting restless, and singing usually calms her. Not at all, Marcus said, moving toward the galley to start breakfast preparations. It's a beautiful song. Is it from your homeworld? A shadow passed briefly across Nessa's features. Yes, from Zalera. My mother used to sing it to me when I was small. She shifted Zara to her other knee, the baby gurgling contentedly. I never thought I'd have the chance to pass it on to my own daughter. Marcus paused in his food preparation, hearing the weight of unspoken history in her voice. Tell me about Zalera, he said gently. What's it like? Nessa's violet eyes grew distant, as if she were seeing across the vast distances of space to her distant home. It's a garden world, she said. 3 moons, all habitable, with bioluminescent forests that glow like captured starlight. The cities are grown rather than built, we coax the trees and flowering vines into the shapes we need. Everything lives in harmony. Sounds like paradise, Marcus observed, heating protein bars and preparing bottles for Zara. It was, Nessa replied, and there was profound sadness in those 2 words. Until the war came. Marcus turned to face her fully, recognizing the pain in her voice. He'd heard that tone before, in the voices of refugees and survivors throughout the outer systems. Civil war. She nodded, her fingers unconsciously tightening around Zara. Traditional factions against the modernists. Those who wanted to preserve the old ways of communion with nature against those who believed we needed to embrace more advanced technology to survive in the galaxy. She sighed deeply. I was caught in the middle, a botanical engineer who used both traditional plant bonding techniques and modern science. Is that why you were here? On Kythera? Partly, Nessa said, accepting the warm food Marcus offered. The research expedition was studying the unique crystal formations beneath the ice. They have properties unlike anything we'd encountered, they seem to interact with organic matter in fascinating ways. My specialty was determining whether they could be cultivated or if they represented an entirely new form of life. Marcus settled across from her with his own breakfast, intrigued. New form of life? Nessa's eyes lit up with scientific enthusiasm, transforming her from survivor back to researcher. The crystals appear to be living minerals, they grow, they respond to stimuli, they even seem to communicate with each other through subsonic vibrations. My preliminary studies suggested they might be symbiotic, capable of forming beneficial relationships with organic beings. That's incredible, Marcus said, genuinely fascinated. No wonder you were excited about the research. I was, she agreed, then her expression dimmed again. We all were. The team was small but dedicated. There was Jorik, my. She paused, looking down at Zara. Jorik was my bonded mate and the expedition's geologist. Vera was our communications specialist, and old Henrik served as our general engineer and wise man. Marcus felt a strange pang at the mention of Jorik, jealousy, perhaps, though he had no right to such feelings. What happened to them? Nessa was quiet for a long moment, feeding Zara small spoonfuls of nutrient paste. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. We'd been here about 6 months when the supply ship failed to arrive. We sent increasingly desperate messages, but there was no response. Later, we learned that the war on Zalera had escalated dramatically. All off-world expeditions were abandoned, considered expendable. She took a shaky breath before continuing. We tried to maintain the research while rationing our supplies, hoping for rescue. But winter came early and harsh. We decided to relocate to a more sheltered position, deeper in the mountain range where the crystal formations were more abundant. Marcus waited, sensing the approaching tragedy in her narrative. The avalanche happened during transport, she said simply. I was 8 months pregnant and had remained at base camp while the others moved the heavy equipment. The entire mountainside came down. I couldn't even recover their bodies. Nessa, Marcus said softly, reaching across to touch her hand. I'm so sorry. She looked up at him, tears shimmering in her violet eyes but not falling. Zara was born 3 weeks later, during the worst storm I'd ever experienced. I delivered her alone in a cave, with nothing but emergency medical supplies and sheer determination. She managed a watery smile. She's stronger than she looks, this little one. She has to have survived here. Marcus felt overwhelming admiration for this remarkable woman who had endured so much and emerged not bitter, but stronger. How did you manage? Food, shelter, medical care. The caves I mentioned, they're heated by geothermal activity and filled with edible fungi that grow around the crystal formations. I learned to identify what was safe, what was nutritious. The crystals themselves seem to purify water and even generate small amounts of oxygen. She stroked Zara's fine hair. It wasn't easy, but we survived. Until your food sources ran out, Marcus said, understanding now why she'd been so far from shelter when he found her. The fungi have a growing cycle tied to the seasonal temperature variations. As winter deepened, they became dormant. I'd been venturing farther and farther from the caves, looking for alternatives. She met his eyes. Yesterday was going to be my last attempt. If I hadn't found anything. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Marcus reached out and gently took her free hand in both of his. But you did find something, he said. You found me. Their eyes met and held, and Marcus felt something electric pass between them. It was more than simple attraction, there was recognition there, as if they'd been searching for each other across the vast loneliness of space. Marcus, Nessa said softly, tell me about you. What brings a cargo pilot to the edge of nowhere? Marcus found himself wanting to share more than he usually did with anyone. I'm what they call a freelance hauler, he said. I go where the big shipping companies won't, dangerous routes, questionable clients, forgotten outposts at the edge of civilization. That sounds lonely, she observed. It is, he admitted. But it's also free. No corporate oversight, no bureaucratic red tape, no one telling me where I can and can't go. He paused, then added more quietly, I guess I've been running for most of my adult life. Running from what? The question was gentle, without judgment, and Marcus found himself answering honestly. Family expectations, mostly. I come from a long line of naval officers and politicians on Terra Prime. My father expected me to follow in his footsteps, take a commission in the colonial fleet, work my way up through the ranks to admiral. But that wasn't what you wanted. I tried it for a while, Marcus said. Made it to lieutenant before I realized I was suffocating. All those rules, all that rigid hierarchy, the endless politics and maneuvering for position. I wanted to see the galaxy, not just the sanitized version they show you from a military bridge. Nessa shifted Zara to her shoulder, patting the baby's back gently. So you bought a ship and became independent. Stole a ship, technically, Marcus said with a rueful grin. The Wandering Star was supposed to be decommissioned, sold for scrap. I liberated her instead. Spent the next 5 years dodging military patrols while I worked to pay off her real value. A romantic rebel, Nessa teased, and Marcus was delighted to see humor returning to her eyes. More like a stubborn fool with commitment issues, he replied. I've been drifting from job to job, system to system, for the better part of a decade. Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. And now? The question was loaded with possibility, and Marcus felt his heart rate increase. Now, he said carefully, I'm wondering if maybe I've been looking for the wrong thing all along. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chiming from the ship's sensor array. Marcus excused himself to check the readings, frowning at what he found. Storm coming in, he announced, studying the meteorological data. Big one, by the looks of it. We'll be locked down tight for at least the next 2 days. Is that a problem? Nessa asked, concern creeping into her voice. For the ship? No, she's weathered worse. But it means we won't be able to venture out to your caves or explore any other options until it passes. He turned back to her with a reassuring smile. Good thing we have enough supplies. As if summoned by his words, the first gusts of wind began to rock the wandering star gently. Through the viewports, they could see the sky darkening ominously, heavy clouds rolling in from the western mountains. Actually, Nessa said thoughtfully, this could be an opportunity. Kythera's storms often trigger the aurora displays, some of the most spectacular light shows in this sector of the galaxy. Aurora displays. The planet's magnetic field interacts with charged particles in its atmosphere during major weather events. The result is. She searched for words, breathtaking. Especially when viewed from inside the ship where it's warm and safe. As evening approached and the storm intensified outside, Marcus began to understand what Nessa had meant. Through the main viewport, the sky had become a canvas of dancing colors, streams of green and blue and violet light that flowed like liquid across the darkness. The aurora seemed to pulse in rhythm with the wind, creating an ever-changing display of cosmic artistry. It's incredible, Marcus breathed, standing close to the viewport with Nessa beside him. Zara slept peacefully in her mother's arms, undisturbed by the light show outside. On Zalera, we believe the auroras are messages from those who've gone before, Nessa said softly. Their way of letting us know they're still watching over us. Marcus glanced at her profile, illuminated by the shifting lights outside. Do you think Jorik is out there somewhere? Watching over you and Zara? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I think, she said finally, that love transcends physical form. Whether that manifests as spirits watching from beyond or simply as the lasting impact we have on each other's lives. I'm not sure it matters. What matters is that the love was real, and it continues to shape who we become. Marcus felt the profound truth in her words. You must have loved him very much. I did, she replied without hesitation. But love isn't finite, Marcus. Having loved deeply doesn't diminish one's capacity to love again, if anything, it expands it. Their eyes met in the aurora-lit cabin, and Marcus felt his breath catch. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, electric with the same energy that painted the sky outside. Nessa, he said softly, and her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. She shifted Zara to one arm and reached up to touch his face with her free hand. Her skin was warm and soft, and Marcus leaned into the contact. I know this is complicated, she whispered. We've known each other barely a day, and there's so much uncertainty ahead. But I feel something when I look at you, Marcus. Something I thought I'd never feel again. I feel it too, he admitted, covering her hand with his own. It scares me. It should, she said with a gentle smile. The best things in life usually do. The first kiss was tentative, exploratory, a question asked and answered in the language of touch. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily, and the aurora outside seemed to pulse more brightly, as if responding to the connection forming between them. We should probably get some rest, Marcus said reluctantly, though he made no move to step away from her. Probably, Nessa agreed, but she didn't move either. They stood together in the shifting light for a long time, Zara sleeping peacefully between them, while outside the storm raged and the sky danced with colors that seemed to celebrate the birth of something new and precious. Finally, as the aurora began to fade and exhaustion claimed them both, they reluctantly separated for the night. But as Marcus lay in his bunk listening to the storm and the soft sounds of mother and child in the next compartment, he found himself thinking not about rescue or survival, but about the possibility of home, not a place, but a feeling, embodied in the remarkable woman who had stumbled into his life when he least expected it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions, but tonight, sheltered from the storm and warmed by newfound connection, three souls found peace in the endless night. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a crystalline world of fresh snow and impossibly clear skies. Marcus stood at the viewport with his first cup of synthetic coffee, watching the sun paint the landscape in shades of gold and pink. Behind him, he could hear Nessa humming softly as she tended to Zara, and the domestic sounds filled him with a contentment he'd never experienced before. The weather looks perfect for travel, Nessa said, joining him at the viewport with the baby in her arms. If you're willing, I'd like to show you the caves where we've been living. There's something there I think you need to see. Marcus turned to study her face, noting the mixture of excitement and nervousness in her expression. Of course. How far is it? About 3 hours on foot through the canyon system. It's easier than the direct route over the ridge. She paused, then added, Marcus, what I'm going to show you, it might change everything we know about this world. Within an hour, they had packed supplies and secured the wandering star for their absence. Marcus carried the heavier equipment while Nessa navigated with Zara secured in an improvised sling across her chest. The route she led them through was sheltered from the worst of the wind, following natural corridors carved by ancient geological processes. The caves were discovered by accident, Nessa explained as they walked. We were tracking seismic readings from the crystal formations when Henrik's equipment detected unusual electromagnetic signatures deeper in the mountain. What we found. She shook her head in wonder. It defied everything we thought we knew about mineral formations. The entrance to the cave system was nearly invisible, a narrow crack in the rock face that widened after a few meters into a proper tunnel. But as they moved deeper, Marcus began to understand why Nessa had been so eager to share this discovery. The walls glowed. Not with reflected light, but with an inner luminescence that seemed to pulse gently, like a slow heartbeat. The crystals embedded in the rock were unlike anything he'd ever seen, not the sharp, angular formations he expected, but smooth, organic curves that seemed to flow like frozen water. This is incredible, Marcus breathed, running his fingers along the glowing wall. The crystals responded to his touch, brightening momentarily before settling back to their steady glow. That's nothing, Nessa said with a smile that held secrets. Wait until you see the main chamber. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern that took Marcus's breath away. The entire space was filled with what could only be described as a garden, though unlike any garden that had ever existed on any world he knew. Crystalline trees stretched toward the cavern's ceiling, their translucent branches heavy with fruit that pulsed with inner light. Flowing between them were streams of what looked like liquid crystal, and everywhere, the soft glow provided warmth and illumination. Welcome to my laboratory, Nessa said proudly. And our home for the past 4 months. Marcus walked deeper into the chamber, marveling at the impossible beauty surrounding them. This is what you've been studying. These crystal trees. They're not just crystals, Nessa said, setting Zara down on a soft bed of glowing moss near what appeared to be a natural pool of warm water. They're alive, Marcus. Truly alive. They grow, they bear fruit, they even seem to communicate with each other through subsonic vibrations. She led him to a section of the cavern where primitive but functional equipment had been set up, microscopes, sample containers, and notebooks filled with detailed observations. My preliminary research suggests they're a form of silicon-based life that has evolved to process geothermal energy directly. But more than that, they seem to respond to the presence of carbon-based life forms. Marcus examined one of the crystalline fruits hanging within reach. It pulsed more brightly as he approached, and he swore he could feel warmth radiating from it. Respond how? Watch, Nessa said, placing her palm against the trunk of the nearest tree. Immediately, the entire organism brightened, and other trees nearby began to glow more intensely as well. They seemed to feed on bioelectric energy. Not parasitically, symbiotically. In exchange for our life energy, they provide warmth, light, purified water, and nutrition. The fruit is edible. More than edible. It's perfectly nutritious for carbon-based life forms. Somehow, these organisms have evolved to create exactly what we need to survive. She picked one of the fruits and offered it to Marcus. Try it. The fruit was unlike anything he'd ever tasted, sweet and tart simultaneously, with a texture that seemed to change as he chewed. More importantly, he immediately felt energized, as if every cell in his body was being nourished at the molecular level. This is how you survived, he said in amazement. You and Zara. This garden sustained you. The trees weren't here when we first arrived, Nessa explained, settling beside the warm pool where Zara was contentedly playing with glowing pebbles. Just the basic crystal formations in the walls. But as I spent more time here, especially after Zara was born, they began to grow. Slowly at first, then more rapidly as our need increased. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. You're saying they grew in response to your presence? I think they're trying to help us, Nessa said simply. The question is why? What evolutionary advantage would there be for a silicon-based organism to nurture carbon-based life? Before Marcus could respond, a soft chiming sound filled the cavern. Both he and Nessa looked around in confusion until they realized the sound was coming from Marcus's emergency beacon, which he'd brought along for safety. That's impossible, he muttered, checking the device. The signal's been dead for days. But the beacon was definitely active, its screen showing a strong, steady transmission signal. More puzzling still, the signal seemed to be coming from the crystal formations themselves. The trees, Nessa said with growing excitement. They're amplifying your beacon. Marcus stared at the device, then at the glowing garden around them. If this signal is strong enough to reach orbit, we could contact passing ships, Nessa finished. Marcus, this changes everything. We could call for rescue, or. She trailed off, and Marcus saw uncertainty replace excitement in her expression. The possibility of rescue should have thrilled them both, but instead, it brought complications neither wanted to face. Nessa, Marcus said gently, moving to sit beside her near the pool. What is it? She was quiet for a long moment, watching Zara play in the warm, glowing water. When she spoke, her voice was soft and conflicted. Yesterday, I would have done anything to get off this world. But now I'm not sure I want to leave. She looked up at him, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears. This place has become home, Marcus. These trees, this cave system, they saved our lives. And you. She reached out to touch his hand. What we have, what's growing between us, I don't want to lose it. Marcus felt his heart constrict. He understood her conflict because he shared it. The thought of rescue ships and returning to civilization, of potentially being separated from Nessa and Zara, filled him with unexpected dread. We don't have to decide anything right now, he said, though the beacon's insistent chiming suggested otherwise. Let's focus on understanding what we're dealing with here. They spent the day exploring the cave system more thoroughly, and with each discovery, Marcus's amazement grew. The crystalline garden was just the beginning. Deeper chambers contained what appeared to be advanced biotechnology, organic computers that processed information at incredible speeds, and environmental systems that maintained perfect atmospheric conditions throughout the vast underground complex. It's like the entire cave system is one massive organism, Nessa explained as they paused for lunch beside a stream of liquid crystal that provided both hydration and nutrition. The individual trees and formations are organs in a larger body, each serving specific functions. And this organism decided to take care of you and Zara? It seems so. But Marcus, there's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. She paused, seeming to gather her courage. I don't think the crystal organism is native to this world. Marcus nearly choked on the fruit he was eating. What do you mean? The geological evidence suggests these formations are relatively recent, maybe a few thousand years old at most. But Kythera is billions of years old. If this organism evolved here, there should be traces of earlier developmental stages in the rock record. There aren't. You're saying it came from somewhere else? I think it's a refugee, Marcus. Just like us. Something that fled to this remote world and went dormant until circumstances required its awakening. She gestured toward the garden around them. Look at how perfectly adapted it is to supporting carbon-based life. What if it evolved alongside humanoid species somewhere else? What if it's been waiting here, hoping others would find it? The implications were staggering. Marcus found himself looking at the crystal trees with new eyes, seeing not just alien organisms but potential allies, fellow travelers in the vast loneliness of space. If you're right, he said slowly, then this isn't just a survival situation anymore. This could be one of the most important discoveries in galactic history. Which brings us back to the beacon, Nessa said quietly. Do we call for rescue and risk having this place overrun by researchers and corporate interests? Or do we stay? Marcus finished. Make this our home. The word hung between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Around them, the crystal garden pulsed with gentle light, as if responding to their emotional state. I need to tell you something, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion he'd kept buried for years. I had a younger brother, Tavian. He was everything I wasn't: responsible, dedicated, eager to follow in our father's footsteps. He would have made an excellent naval officer. Nessa waited patiently, sensing the pain in his words. He died in a training accident when he was 19, Marcus continued. Reactor explosion on a training vessel. Completely preventable if the maintenance protocols had been followed properly. His hands clenched into fists. That's when I realized that all the rules, all the regulations, all the military precision, none of it mattered if the people in charge didn't actually care about the lives under their command. Is that why you left? I left because I couldn't bear the thought of becoming part of a system that had killed my brother through negligence. But also. He paused, struggling with words he'd never spoken aloud. I left because I was afraid. Afraid of caring about anything too much, afraid of losing someone else I loved. It was easier to drift from place to place, never forming connections that could hurt me. Nessa moved closer, taking his hand in hers. And now? Now I realize I've been running from the wrong thing, Marcus said, meeting her eyes. I was afraid of loss, but what I should have been afraid of was never finding something worth the risk of losing. In the gentle glow of the crystal garden, with Zara playing contentedly nearby and the beacon still chiming its offer of rescue, Marcus and Nessa found themselves at a crossroads that would define the rest of their lives. I love you, Marcus said simply, the words coming easier than he'd expected. I know it's crazy, I know we've only known each other for 3 days, but I love you, Nessa. Both of you. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. I love you too, Marcus. More than I thought possible after Jorik. They kissed then, surrounded by the alien garden that had somehow brought them together, while overhead the beacon continued its patient signal to the stars. When they broke apart, both knew that whatever decision they made about rescue would be made together, as a family. The beacon will keep transmitting, Marcus said, looking at the device thoughtfully. But we don't have to answer every ship that responds. We could be selective. What do you mean? I mean we wait for the right ship, with the right kind of people. People who would understand what we've found here and help us protect it. He gestured toward the crystal garden. This place deserves better than to become a corporate mining operation or a military research facility. Nessa nodded slowly. We could establish a proper research station. Study the crystal organisms, learn from them, maybe even find ways to help other refugee species. A sanctuary, Marcus said, warming to the idea. Not just for us, but for anyone who needs a place to heal and grow. As if responding to their decision, the crystal trees around them pulsed with brighter light, and new fruit began to form on the branches, as if the organism itself approved of their choice to stay and protect this miraculous place. That evening, as they settled down to sleep in the warm embrace of the living cave, with Zara safe between them and the gentle glow of their crystal guardians watching over them, Marcus felt a peace he'd never known. He was no longer running, he was home. And tomorrow, they would begin building something beautiful together, a family and a future among the wonders of an alien garden that had chosen to love them back.